The smell of diesel exhaust and hot gravel hit him a second before the silver SUV came into view, crawling up his private drive like a determined metal insect. Leo didn't need to see the vanity plate, HOA Prez, to know who was paying him. An unwelcome visit. He watched from the kitchen window, the sharp, acidic taste of his morning coffee turning sour on his tongue. His fingers, calloused from a lifetime of work that didn't involve signing petty violation notices, tightened around the warm ceramic mug. The SUV stopped dead at the 8-foot-tall wrought iron gate, a gate Leo had installed himself, bolt by rust-resistant bolt, after the last peeping Tom incident the HOA had deemed unverifiable. The driver's door swung open, and Brenda Getz unfolded herself from the leather interior. She was a woman constructed of sharp angles, shoulders padded for power, a chin lifted in perpetual disapproval, and hair shellacked into a helmet of blonde that didn't dare move in the humid Georgia breeze. She marched to the gate, not with urgency, but with the slow, inevitable pace of a glacier that knew it could outweigh anything in its path. Leo didn't move. He stayed at the window, sipping his coffee, watching the performance. This was his land, his sanctuary. The 2 acres of dense Georgia pines and the modest, cedar-sided house at the end of the drive were his reward for 30 years of quiet service, for things he never talked about, and most people couldn't imagine. It was the one place where the rules were his own. Brenda produced a key fob from her crisp, white linen pantsuit and pressed a button. Nothing happened. His gate didn't so much as hum. She pressed it again, jabbing at the plastic with a manicured finger. Leo allowed himself a grim smile. He deactivated the community master code the day the gate was installed. He watched her pull out her phone, her movements stiff with irritation. His own phone, sitting on the granite countertop, buzzed. Once Brenda Getz, HOA president. Leo, your gate, it's malfunctioning. I need entry for a compliance inspection. The audacity of the text, the sheer unvarnished assumption of access, sent a low thrum of anger through him. He typed back, his thumbs slow and deliberate. Leo, it's not malfunctioning. It's working, exactly as intended. Private property, Brenda. What do you need to inspect? The pause was long enough that he could see her staring at her screen, probably recalibrating her approach. He could almost hear the sigh of exasperation, smell the faint cloud of her expensive floral perfume mixing with the pine-scented air. Brenda Getz, HOA president. This is not a request, Leo. It's a notice. Covenant 12, Section B, the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair, is empowered to conduct routine inspections of all properties to ensure adherence to community standards. Your refusal constitutes a violation, a compliance inspection. The words were so sterile, so bureaucratic, but they carried the weight of a threat. He'd heard the stories, of course. Old man Henderson down the street, fined into oblivion for a mailbox deemed excessively rustic. The young couple on Sycamore Lane, forced to repaint their entire house because the shade of eggshell blue had a hint of gray the committee didn't approve. He'd stayed out of it. His property was pristine, his house a model of understated elegance. He'd paid his dues on time and kept to himself. He'd thought that would be enough. He walked out onto his front porch, the old wood boards creaking, a familiar welcome under his boots. The morning air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the distant sweet rot of fallen magnolia blossoms. He crossed the 50 yards of manicured lawn to the gate, meeting her on the other side of the ornate iron bars. Brenda, he said, his voice level, a tone he'd used to de-escalate situations that made HOA disputes look like a tea party. Leo, she replied, her smile a tight, lipless line. There seems to be a misunderstanding. We need to verify the roofing materials on the shed structure at the rear of your property. A drone flyover suggested non-compliant asphalt shingles instead of the mandated cedar shake. A drone flyover. The words landed like a punch to the gut. They were flying drones over his property. The violation was absurd. The shed was old. built by the previous owner and nestled so far back in the tree line it was practically invisible. But the method of discovery was the real issue: the invasion. The shed predates the covenant by a decade, Leo stated, keeping his voice calm, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the iron bar. It's grandfathered in, and even if it weren't, you don't have the right to fly a drone over my land. That's a Fourth Amendment issue, expectation of privacy. This was the first knowledge bomb, dropped right there at the gate. It wasn't just about HOA rules, it was about constitutional rights. Her smile didn't falter, but a flicker of annoyance crossed her eyes. She wasn't used to being countered with actual law. "The covenants you signed," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "which are binding legal documents, grant the ARC a right of entry for inspection purposes. The drone is simply a tool for initial assessment. Now, if you'll just open the gate, we can resolve this quickly and without further notation." She gestured behind her to the SUV. The passenger window rolled down silently, revealing a pale, nervous-looking man holding a clipboard. Harold, the committee's lackey. He offered a weak, apologetic wave. Leo didn't budge. "The covenant grants you access to maintain common areas. My driveway, my lawn, the land my house sits on, that's not a common area. That's my home. You want to come onto my property? You get a court order. You bring the sheriff. You don't just show up and demand I open my gate because your drone saw something it didn't like." The standoff stretched, filled by the chittering of squirrels and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Brenda's composure began to crack. The pleasant mask slipped, revealing the cold steel beneath. "This obstinance is noted, Leo. This will not end well for you. Fines accrue daily for non-compliance. We have lien authority. We have foreclosure authority. Do not mistake the pleasant nature of this community for weakness." The threat hung in the air, ugly and real. Foreclosure. Over a shed he couldn't even see from the road. She turned on her heel, her heels crunching on the gravel as she marched back to her idling vehicle. Harold gave one last terrified look before the window slid up, sealing him in with her wrath. Leo watched the SUV reverse down the drive, a cloud of dust marking its retreat. The victory felt hollow and temporary. He knew this wasn't about a shed. This was about the gate. The gate was a symbol of his independence, a physical manifestation of a boundary she was determined to cross. She couldn't stand that there was a door in her kingdom she didn't have a key to. He spent the rest of the day on edge, the quiet of his property feeling fragile. Every rustle of leaves sounded like an approaching drone. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. That evening, as he grilled a steak on his back patio, the scent of searing meat and hickory smoke usually a balm to his soul, he kept, looking over his shoulder into the deepening shadows of the woods. The first notice came via certified mail 2 days later. It was not just about the shed. It was a multi-page document listing 7 violations: unapproved gate structure, height, design, electronic operation, non-compliant shed roofing, unauthorized drainage modification, a French drain he'd installed to prevent basement flooding, failure to maintain landscaping to community standards. A single small branch from a water oak had fallen on his lawn during a storm and hadn't been removed within the mandated 24-hour window. The fines totaled $2,500 with a threat of doubling, if not resolved within 10 days. It was a blatant act of aggression, a declaration of war written in legalese. He felt a cold fury settle in his chest, the kind he hadn't felt in a long, long time. This wasn't anger, it was focus. He went into his study, a room lined with books on history, engineering, and, most importantly, law. He booted up his computer, the blue light reflecting in his determined eyes. He started digging. He read the covenants cover to cover, every bylaw, every amendment. He cross-referenced them with county land records, with state property law. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a researcher. He knew how to find the flaw in any system, the weak point in any defense. And then he found it, buried in an addendum from 1985, a paragraph about utility easements. It granted the county and its designated agents a right of access for maintenance of power lines. The HOA had later voted to designate itself as a duly recognized agent, for the purpose of aesthetic oversight of utility corridors. It was a stretch, a huge one, but they'd used it before. He found the records. They'd used it to force the Johnson family to cut down a beloved old willow tree that was obstructing the visual lines of power cables. They'd used it to force the Woos to relocate their garden shed because it was within 10 feet of an underground gas line easement. They were going to try and use it on him. They were going to claim his gate impeded access for utility maintenance. It was their key, their way in. The realization was still settling in his gut, cold and heavy, when his doorbell rang. It was late. Too late for visitors. He moved to the front door, not turning on the porch light, and looked through the peephole. A man in a uniform was standing there. Not a police officer. A county sheriff's deputy. His heart hammered against his ribs. Had it already escalated? This far? Had they filed some sort of complaint? He unlocked the door and opened it a crack. "Leo Maddox?" the deputy asked, his voice neutral, professional. "That's me." The deputy held out a thick folded packet of papers. "Sorry to bother you so late, sir. Civil matter. You've been served." Leo took the papers, his fingers numb. The deputy gave a curt nod and walked back to his cruiser. Leo stood in the doorway, the humid night air washing over him. He didn't need to open the packet to know what it was. The words across the top were printed in stark, brutal capital letters. Petition for injunctive relief and declaratory judgment. They weren't just fining him anymore. They were suing him. They were asking a judge to force him to remove his gate and grant them permanent, unrestricted access to his property. He walked back inside, the weight of the legal documents feeling like a lead blanket. He dropped them on his kitchen table, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet house. This was no longer a dispute. This was a fight for his home. He looked out the dark window, toward the gate that had started it all. He could almost feel Brenda Getz out there, smiling her thin, victorious smile in the darkness. She thought she had him. She thought he would back down. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. She had just started a war with a man who had spent his life finishing them. And the first thing any good soldier knows is that you never, ever fight on the enemy's terms. Where are you watching from? Comment your city right now. Let me see how far the reach of HOA overreach truly extends. Because if you think this was an escalation, you haven't seen anything yet. What they did next would test every single thing I had, and the weapon I found to fight back with was buried so deep, not even their drones could have ever found it. The heavy linen weave paper of the lawsuit felt like a lead weight in Leo's hands. The words petition for injunctive relief swam in his vision, not from fear, but from a white-hot, focused rage. The humid night air, thick with the chorus of crickets and the distant, lonely cry of a whippoorwill, suddenly felt oppressive, pressing in on him from all sides. The scent of rain was coming, a metallic tang on the breeze that did nothing to clean the air, only promised a heavier dampness to come. He didn't sleep. He spread the documents across his large oak work table, the same table where he'd once built detailed model ships and repaired antique clocks. Now it was a war room. A single, harsh halogen lamp cast deep shadows, turning the familiar room into a landscape of stark contrasts. The smell of old paper and dust from his law books mixed with the sharp, clean scent of highlighter ink. He read the lawsuit until he could have recited it from memory. It was Brenda's masterpiece of petty tyranny, a document that twisted the HOA's covenants into a grotesque pretzel to justify its assault. Their argument was breathtaking in its arrogance. They claimed his gate constituted a nuisance and an impediment to essential services. They cited the utility easement addendum, of course, but they'd layered on a dozen other frivolous claims. The shed, the drainage, the branch, all of it was bundled into this legal assault, creating a mountain of alleged violations designed to bury him in paperwork and legal fees. The goal was clear: overwhelm him, bankrupt him, and seize his property through foreclosure. It was a scorched earth policy over a gate. This was the second knowledge bomb, the one that detonated silently in his chest as he read, HOAs have a terrifying amount of power, and they can weaponize the law itself to enforce their will. They aren't just issuing fines. They can sue you in civil court, and the cost of defending yourself alone can be a life-altering punishment, even if you're right. For 3 days, he lived in a vortex of legal research. Coffee brewed at midnight tasted of desperation and determination. He existed on a diet of adrenaline and fury. His world shrunk to the glow of his computer screen and the dense, dry text of Georgia property law. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a master strategist. He understood systems, pressure points, and the art of finding an opponent's critical vulnerability. He began to map the HOA's power structure. Brenda Getz was the undeniable queen, but her court was interesting. There was Harold, the trembling clipboard carrier, who was the treasurer. A man named Carl, a retired, grumpy pipe fitter, was head of the ARC, but the most intriguing member was the secretary, a woman named Annette, who always looked like she'd just smelled something bad in the meeting minutes Leo had managed to obtain through a public records request. He also discovered the true source of Brenda's power. It wasn't just her position. It was her brother-in-law, a local judge named William Getz. It was a quiet, unspoken thing, but his presence on the bench in the county courthouse was the sword hanging over every homeowner who even thought about challenging her. It was why people paid the outrageous fines. It was why they repainted their houses and ripped out their gardens. They weren't just afraid of the HOA. They were afraid of the law itself, which they believed was an extension of Brenda's will. The weight of it was immense. He was one man against a well-funded, legally armed corporation with what appeared to be a friendly judge in its pocket. The isolation was a physical ache. The gentle rustle of the pine trees outside his office window, once a sound of peace, now sounded like whispers of impending doom. He decided he needed to see the enemy on her home turf. He went to the next HOA meeting. The community clubhouse smelled of stale coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and the cloying sweetness of dollar store air freshener. The fluorescent lights hummed an annoying high-pitched tune overhead, bleaching the color from everyone's faces. He took a seat in the back, a ghost at their feast. Brenda presided from the head of the table with the serene authority of a monarch. The meetings were a parade of petty grievances, a complaint about a basketball left on a driveway, a 30-minute debate on the acceptable shade of beige for repainting a fence. A couple was verbally flogged for having a bird feeder that attracted non-aesthetic birds. Through it all, Brenda nodded, made notes, and issued rulings with a finality that brooked no argument. Harold flinched every time she spoke. Carl grunted his assent, and Annette, the secretary, simply took notes, her mouth a tight, disapproving line. It was during a discussion about forcing the Millers to remove a beloved, but apparently overgrown, azalea bush that Leo saw it. The first crack. Brenda was pontificating about community standards and property values when Annette, without looking up from her note-taking, spoke in a quiet, dry voice. The original landscaping plan from 1982 specifically lists azaleas as a recommended shrub for that exact lot line, Brenda. Page 14 of the annex. A dead silence fell over the room. Brenda's smile didn't slip, but it became fixed, a porcelain mask. Those plans are outdated, Annette. Our standards have evolved. The covenant hasn't, Annette replied flatly, finally looking up. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and utterly bored. It still references the original plan as the guiding aesthetic. If we force them to remove it, we're acting outside our own governing documents. It leaves us open to a challenge. The moment passed. Brenda steamrolled over the objection, and the Millers were given a 30-day notice to remove the bush. But Leo had seen it. Annette was the record keeper, the keeper of the actual law, and she knew Brenda was operating outside of it. She was a dissenter, silenced but not defeated. He filed the information away, a potential ally, or at least a source. After the meeting, as people filtered out, he lingered. He saw Brenda's daughter, a sullen teenager named Megan, slouched in a plastic chair in the hallway, furiously tapping on her phone. She was the spitting image of her mother, but where Brenda's features were sharp with ambition, Megan's were soft with resentment. She was dressed in a black hoodie despite the heat, a tiny act of rebellion against the pristine, pastel world her mother ruled. As Brenda held court with a sycophantic couple, Leo saw Megan roll her eyes so hard it was a miracle they stayed in her head. She caught Leo looking and glared at him, a defiant, universal look of teenage angst. But in that glare, Leo didn't see an enemy. He saw a prisoner. The lawsuit proceeded. Leo, acting as his own attorney for the time being, filed a motion to dismiss. It was a delaying tactic, a way to force them to show their cards and rack up their own legal bills. The law firm they'd hired, Crenshaw & Poole, was expensive. He knew that. He was counting on it. His strategy was not to win a dramatic courtroom victory. Not yet. His strategy was to make defeating him more expensive than it was worth. He was using their own weapon, financial attrition, against them. He received a response to his motion. It was predictably vicious, but buried in the legalese was a fascinating detail. They had attached an invoice from the drone photography company as Evidence A. It was a company called Skyview Scans, and the invoice was for a targeted lot survey. But the listed client wasn't the HOA ARC, it was B. Getz' personal account. The third knowledge bomb landed with the force of a sledgehammer. HOA board members are fiduciaries. They have a legal duty to act in the best financial interest of the association. Using HOA funds for personal expenses, or in this case, apparently, using a personal account for HOA business to possibly hide the expense, is a major breach of that duty. It's not just a conflict of interest, it's potentially embezzlement. This was it. This was the vulnerability. Brenda wasn't just a bully, she was a sloppy one. She was so used to operating without scrutiny that she'd gotten careless. The drone wasn't an official HOA action. It was her personal vendetta, and she'd likely either paid for it herself and planned to get reimbursed later without documentation, or she'd used the HOA's money for a personal project. Either way, it was a thread, and Leo knew that if you pulled hard enough on a single thread, the whole sweater could unravel. He started digging into the HOA's finances. The publicly available budgets were vague, showing large line items for landscaping and maintenance, with no detailed breakdown. To get the real records, the receipts, the bank statements, he'd need to launch a formal audit. And to do that, he'd need the support of other homeowners. He began to quietly reach out. He started with the Millers, the couple with the azalea bush. He found them in their backyard, staring at the vibrant pink blooms with a palpable sadness. The air smelled of freshly turned earth and grilling hamburgers, a quintessential suburban scene being poisoned by HOA malice. "She can't actually make you do it, you know," Leo said, leaning against their fence. "The original covenants protect that specific planting. Your secretary, Annette, even said so in the meeting." Mr. Miller, a kindly-looking man with dirt on his knees, just sighed. "What does it matter? She'll just find another way. She always does. Her brother-in-law is just one judge," Leo finished, "and he can't protect her from everything." He told them about the lawsuit, about the drone invoice, about the financial opacity. He saw a flicker of hope in their eyes, quickly suppressed by years of conditioned fear. He did the same with others. The young couple forced to repaint their house. Old man Henderson still bitter about his mailbox. He was building a coalition of the unwilling, a silent army of the aggrieved. But they were scared, terrified. Brenda's power wasn't an illusion. It was a very real, very intimidating structure. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. He was checking his P.O. box. He'd started using one for all HOA-related mail after being served at his home, and found a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of an old invoice from a landscaping company, Southern Green, made out to the HOA. The work described was removal and replacement of damaged crepe myrtles on Common Area B. The amount was $2,500, but someone had taken a red pen and circled the invoice number and written, "See invoice NAR 442, double billing," in a neat, familiar handwriting. It was Annette's. The secretary was feeding him information. She was the silent whistleblower. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was more than a thread. This was a live wire. Double billing? That wasn't just carelessness. That was outright fraud. If Brenda was submitting falsified invoices and pocketing the difference, her empire wasn't just corrupt, it was criminal. He spent the next 48 hours cross-referencing every public financial record he could find. The trail was muddy, but Annette's clue was the key. He found the approved budget line for the crepe myrtles. He found the minutes where the board approved the expenditure. And then, using a loophole in the state's nonprofit laws, his fourth knowledge bomb, he filed an official, formal records request for inspection with the HOA board, certified mail, citing his rights as a member of the association to review all financial documents to ensure fiduciary duty was being met. He wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding. By law, they had to comply. The response was not from the HOA's lawyer, it was from Brenda herself. A phone call. Her voice on the line was like ice cracking. "Leo, withdraw your request." "It's my right, Brenda. The law is very clear. I am warning you." The condescension was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "You have no idea what you're playing with. Stop digging. Settle the lawsuit. Remove the gate. This is your last chance to walk away from this with anything left." It was the threat he'd been waiting for. The threat that proved he was right. She was terrified of what was in those books. "The only thing I'm going to be removing, Brenda," he said, his voice calm and steady, "is you from that president's chair." He hung up. The silence in his house was absolute. The fight was no longer about a gate. It was about corruption. It was about theft. It was about justice. He knew what he had to do next. It was a nuclear option, a move that would escalate this war to its absolute peak. He picked up the phone again, his finger hovering over the number he'd looked up but never dialed. It wasn't for a lawyer. It was for the local investigative reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who had written a series on municipal corruption. He was going to take this public. He was going to bring the whole damn thing down on her head, but as he was about to dial, his own phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Maddox?" A young female voice asked, shaky and nervous. "Yes? It's Megan. Megan Getz. I need to talk to you. My mom, I think she's done something really bad, and I have proof." The line went dead. Leo stood frozen in the middle of his kitchen, the only sound the frantic pounding of his own heart. The princess in the tower was handing him the keys to the kingdom. But was it a trap? Or was it the beginning of the end for Brenda Getz? What would you have done? Trust the terrified daughter of your greatest enemy? Or stick to the plan and call the newspaper? The next move was the most dangerous one yet, and the fate of everything, my home, my freedom, the whole community, hung in the balance. Comment below what you think I should have done, because what happened next was more shocking than anything I could have ever imagined. The phone felt cold and slick in Leo's hand. Megan Getz's voice, a terrified whisper hanging in the static, had vanished, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any threat. The scent of rain he'd noticed earlier finally broke, fat drops Kaishi beginning to, smacking against the cedar shingles of his roof, a sudden, frantic drumbeat that mirrored his pulse. The taste of copper, fear and adrenaline flooded his mouth. This was it. The chessboard had been upended, and a wild card had skittered into the center of the game. Trust the enemy's daughter? It was a gambit straight out of a bad spy thriller. It could be a trap, orchestrated by Brenda to lure him into something that would discredit him utterly. But the raw terror in Megan's voice, that hadn't sounded manufactured. It sounded like the desperation of a prisoner rattling the bars of a gilded cage. He made a split-second decision. He called the number back. It went straight to voicemail, a generic robotic greeting, no name. He sent a text to the same number. Where? When? The 3 blinking dots appeared immediately, then vanished. Then a single word appeared. Now. An address followed. It wasn't the Getz house. It was a 24-hour diner off the state highway, a place of sticky floors and weak coffee, neutral territory. Leo grabbed his keys, his mind racing. He shoved the copied invoice from Annette into his pocket, a talisman of the first crack in the dam. As he sprinted through the now driving rain to his truck, the cold water soaking through his shirt, he realized he was walking into a potential ambush, armed with nothing but a hunch and a piece of paper. The diner smelled of old frying oil, bleach, and the wet wool of a single trucker huddled over a plate of eggs at the counter. The air conditioning was cranked too high, a glacial defense against the Georgia humidity. Megan was in a back booth, shrouded in the same black hoodie, her face pale and illuminated by the glow of her phone. She flinched when he slid into the booth across from her. She didn't speak. She just pushed her phone across the Formica table. On the screen was a photo of a document. It was an invoice from Southern Green Landscaping, made out to the HOA. The amount was $20,500 for tree removal and disposal. But then she swiped to the next photo. It was another invoice from the same company, with the same date, for the same amount for the same work. The only difference was the invoice number. She had me help her scan the paperwork for the board, Megan whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cooler. I thought it was a mistake, a duplicate. I asked her about it. Megan's eyes welled with tears, not of sadness, but of furious humiliation. She told me to never question her again. She said it was for operational liquidity. She said I was too stupid to understand. Leo's breath caught. This was it. The fifth knowledge bomb, the one that would detonate Brenda's entire world. Double billing is a classic embezzlement scheme. You submit 2 identical invoices for the same work, the board approves both payments, and you pocket the second check. It's fraud, plain and simple. There's more, Megan said, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. She swiped again. Photos of bank statements. Personal bank statements in Brenda and her husband's name. There were deposits, $2,400, $4,800, $2,500, that coincided perfectly with duplicate invoices from Southern Green, from a pool maintenance company, from a paving contractor. She'd been doing it for years, skimming tens of thousands of dollars from the HOA coffers. Why? Leo asked, the word escaping as a stunned exhale. Megan's face twisted. The Lexus, the country club membership, the trips to Hilton Head, my dad's business. It's not doing great. She said she was keeping up appearances, for the family. She spat the last word like it was poison. She's not keeping up appearances, she's a thief. Leo looked at this angry, betrayed girl, and he saw not the enemy's daughter, but the key to the prison door. He saw his victory. Why are you giving this to me? Her eyes met his, blazing with a lifetime of repressed rebellion. Because I'm sick of it. I'm sick of her. I'm sick of everyone being afraid of us, of me. I heard her on the phone tonight. She wasn't just going to take your house. Leo, she was going to ruin you. She was going to have her brother-in-law issue a bench warrant for your arrest for contempt over some made-up nonsense. She was going to have you put in handcuffs in your own driveway to make an example of you. The fury that ignited in Leo's chest was colder and more focused than anything he'd ever felt. It wasn't just about the gate anymore. It was about annihilation. Brenda wasn't playing for fines. She was playing for blood. He copied every file from Megan's phone onto his own. The evidence was now his. He looked at Megan. You know what happens when this comes out? She nodded, a single sharp movement. I know, I don't care anymore. He believed her. The annual HOA meeting was held in the same fluorescent buzzing clubhouse, but the atmosphere was utterly different. The air was thick with the smell of nervous sweat and anticipation. It was packed. Leo had seen to that. He'd quietly spread the word, be there. The endgame is tonight. The Millers were there. Old man Henderson was there, leaning on his cane. The young couple from Sycamore Lane held hands, their knuckles white. Annette, the secretary, sat at the front table, her posture rigid, her pen poised over her ledger. She gave Leo the faintest, almost imperceptible nod when he walked in. Brenda took her seat at the head of the table, a queen holding court. She looked triumphant, her gaze sweeping over the crowd as if surveying her subjects. She didn't see the rebellion in their eyes. She only saw their attendance, which she mistook for submission. Let's call this meeting to order, she began, her voice dripping with faux warmth. "We have a full agenda tonight, but first, we must address the ongoing and frankly disgraceful matter of Leo Maddox's non-compliance." She launched into a prepared speech, full of words like blight, values, and the greater good. She spoke of the lawsuit, of the judge's impending ruling, of the financial reckoning that awaited those who defied the community. She was laying the groundwork for his financial execution. Leo let her talk. He let her dig her own grave with every sanctimonious word. He sat perfectly still, a rock in the river of her rhetoric. Finally, she finished. "So, unless Mr. Maddox has seen the error of his ways and is prepared to sign a compliance agreement and a confession of judgment tonight, I move we proceed with the vote to authorize maximum legal fees to pursue this to its fullest extent." The room was silent. All eyes turned to Leo. He slowly stood up. The creak of his chair was deafening in the hush. He walked to the front of the room, a sheaf of papers in his hand. He didn't look at Brenda. He addressed the room, his voice, calm and clear, carrying to every corner. "Brenda speaks of values," he began. "And she's right. Values matter. Integrity matters. Honesty matters." He turned and finally looked at her. Her smile was still there, but it was brittle. "She also speaks of financial reckoning. Again, she's right." He held up the first paper. It was the drone invoice. "This is a bill for a targeted lot survey of my property. The client listed is B. Getz' personal account. Why was our HOA president using a personal account to conduct HOA business? Was it to hide the expense? Or was it because she knew flying a drone over my private property without a warrant was illegal, and she didn't want it traced back to the HOA?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face flushed. "That is a proprietary matter for the executive board," she started. Leo cut her off, holding up the second set of papers. The Southern Green invoices. He explained the double billing scheme in simple, devastating terms. He showed them the two identical invoices. He showed them the bank statements Megan had provided, the deposits matching the fraudulent amounts. He connected the dots for everyone in the room, each piece of evidence a nail in Brenda Getz's coffin. The room erupted. It was no longer a murmur, it was a roar of outrage. Brenda was on her feet, her face a mask of purple rage. "Lies! Forgeries! This is slander! He's a desperate man lashing out!" But the sixth knowledge bomb, the most powerful one, was yet to come. Leo raised his voice above the din. "The Georgia Property Owners Association Act, Section 44-3230, he boomed, states that any member of the association has the absolute right to inspect all books and records. I filed a formal request." Brenda refused. Why? Because she knew what was in them. That's not just a refusal, that's a violation of state law. And under that same law, he continued, the final piece of the puzzle snapping into place, if a board member is found to have breached their fiduciary duty through fraud or embezzlement, the homeowners have the right to vote for their immediate removal and can petition the courts to dissolve the entire HOA board for cause. The word dissolve hung in the air, a thunderclap. The door to the clubhouse swung open. Everyone turned. Two uniformed county sheriff's deputies stood there, along with a man in a cheap suit holding a briefcase. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Brenda's face went from purple to a deathly white. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Brenda Getz, we have a warrant for your financial records, and we'd like to ask you some questions about the financial practices of the Bent Creek Oaks Homeowners Association." It was over. The empire crumbled not with a war, but with a whisper from a rebellious daughter and the cold, hard light of the law. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Brenda was arrested, charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her brother-in-law, Judge Getz, recused himself from all related cases, his reputation irreparably tarnished by association. The lawsuit against Leo was dismissed with prejudice. A new board was elected. Annette was the unanimous choice for president. Her first act was to tear up all the frivolous fines and violations Brenda had issued. Her second was to formally apologize to Leo and the entire community. Her third was to initiate a full, independent forensic audit of every dollar that had ever passed through the HOA's accounts. Leo stood at his gate weeks later, the early morning sun warming the wrought iron. The scent of pine and damp earth was clean again, no longer tainted by the specter of diesel exhaust and Brenda's perfume. The gate wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that some lines shouldn't be crossed, that power should never go unchecked, and that sometimes the quiet man with the law on his side can topple the noisiest tyrant. He'd fought for his home, but he'd won back a community. The Eye. Victory wasn't just his. It belonged to the Millers and their azaleas, to Old Man Henderson, to every person who had ever been pushed around by a petty dictator hiding behind a clipboard. He looked out at the road, peaceful and quiet. His property, his rules. And he wasn't backing down. He never would. This wasn't just my story. It's a blueprint. If your HOA is overstepping, remember, know your covenants, know your state laws, and know that the biggest bullies are often the most terrified of the light. Your story could be next. Comment your HOA horror below. I read every single one. And if you believe no one is above the law, hit subscribe. Because together, we can hold them accountable. Want to see another insane HOA takedown? The one in Boca? Rotten involving the retired Marine and the forbidden American flag was even wilder. Click here to see how that battle ended. You won't believe it.